Okay, well, we are talking about wisdom, and we want to dive into what is wisdom and what are the pillars of wisdom, because I think there are pillars. So I'm suggesting that there's both an internal sort of, here's what helps us to grow in wisdom from an internal perspective, but then there's also external or contextual stimuli that can help us to grow into wisdom. And I think those are both important. I'm reminded of Carl Jung and his introversion, extroversion concept, where you had the internal parts that you work through as a means to understanding the world around you, and that those people who were primarily oriented that way could sometimes forego the external realities of the environment around them, the world around them. And then others were far more focused externally on the environment around them, but not paying attention to the internal experience. And I think this goes to the sort of subjectivity, objectivity, and that the back and forth between those two. And I think that's why sort of that ecology of practices, and I've taken that phrase from John Vervaeke, which I find tremendously helpful, is to be thinking about what are and really not just thinking, but actually practicing an ecology of wisdom practices. These can help us to ever grow into more of the kinds of people that are connected to the world around us, connected to ourselves, connected to the transcendent, and just happier all around. I think more peaceful, more balanced. And so that is the big thing, is to help us to, first of all, but to define what wisdom is. I've heard so many different definitions around it that I've thought, I'm not entirely sure that it sounds all that helpful. So one of the earliest ones I remember hearing was, wisdom is different from knowledge in the sense that it's the application of knowledge. Okay, but that application can be either really good or really bad. So I'm not sure that by definition alone is wisdom. It leans more towards wisdom, sure, because the application requires wisdom. But it's not the application itself that's wise. That is wisdom. It's not that I've applied the knowledge, that makes me wise. It's like, no, there's something beyond that.
It's hard to define, but I think if we look in our own experience, often we have a better time knowing what it is like. So I was on a phone call earlier and I was explaining some of the stuff that we went through as a business over the last couple of years, where we both had the same internal gut sense of knowing about something and the regrets of not listening to it. So when we talk about this internal wisdom, it's like, have you had the experience where you've had a voice or this sense internally that what was in front of you either was or was not the right thing to do? We're talking about the internal mechanisms, and sometimes we're more tuned into them than others, but it's the part of us that has that deep sense of knowing. I think one of the reasons wisdom is hard to define is because you're stretching the capacity of what language can do in descriptions. But the experiential aspect, I think, is one of the things I want to pull on, and then we're going to try and articulate the different aspects, the pillars within it. But most of us know when we have had someone come to us too, externally, and they have just had the right word for us at the right moment. They have said that thing that cut through and gave us that sense of clarity, and we knew, like, this is right, and this is how to proceed. And many of us have had the experience internally as well, where we've had this sense of, like, I don't even know entirely why, but I have a sense that this is how I need to move forward.
Yeah.
And so most people, when we talk about wisdom and developing wisdom, and we're talking about having an internal wisdom and also seeking external sources of wisdom, most of us have had the experience both of silencing inner eternal wisdom, where we have pain because we didn't listen to that voice. And many of us have had the external experience too, where someone gave us the right word at the right time and we either listened or didn't, and either carry the pain or the relief of following through to that. And so I want us to be able to dive into the head center, the space of analyzing it and looking at it and understanding what it is, so that we can intentionally develop more.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want us to miss that if it sounds lofty or if it sounds like a hard thing to think about, try to pull up experiences that you've already had, because I know you've already had experiences that describe what this is.
Well, and that's why we're going to go through the three centers of intelligence. That's what we always do as Enneagram people is that we practice this. We've got the three centers, and we can access that deeper wisdom through the three centers. That's one of the internal ways to do that. And the pillars line up very nicely with each of the centers. But I think I would define wisdom as light or as insight. It is the ability to see what you haven't been up to this point able to see. So that's why wisdom creates these moments of aha. We love the sort of wisdom sayings where we come across something and it's like, wow, that really is powerful. That really spoke to me. That really opened my eyes to something. And why it is that we even have our favorites and we keep going back to them, it's because in some sense, we briefly touched on this at the previous podcast, is that there are some natural orientations each of us possess, or patterns that we will keep falling back into. And these sayings are useful to us because they help us to get out of that pattern. They help us to exit the familiar paths we walk on. One of them is that I've used for myself, and it's sort of a mantra, but there's wisdom to it, is you have everything you need right here and right now. And that would not have made sense to me 10, 15 years ago, but it makes a lot of sense to me now. And it's something that helps me to return back to my better self rather than falling back into the well-worn grooves, the patterns that are so familiar to me as a 7 and how I go through meeting my needs. I think that that's why, to me, wisdom is light, it's insight. It's that ability to recognize your level of your sort of patterns, but also your consciousness, what you're attending to, what your vision sees and what it excludes. And we all do that. We all have things that we focus in on, which is the reason why in family systems, siblings will say, well, remember when this happened, or remember that this is what was done. And we might even remember similar situations, but we will also remember very different things. There are certain words that were said to us that we hold on to, and others we forget. Why is it? Because it's not universal. It's not the same for everybody. It's what our minds attend to. And because of that, it excludes a whole lot. I remember you and I talked about this early on when we were doing these podcasts. We were talking about how our type is like a filter. So it filters out so many things that are coming in. I had this conversation with a client earlier today where I asked her if she was able to perceive the way that love was coming toward her. And it was like, there was that kind of like knowing, yeah, I don't always see it, do I? I mean, it's very difficult for me to see it. And it's because our minds are filters. It filters in certain things and filters out certain other things. And that is what leads us to foolishness. The opposite of wisdom is that we keep repeating these patterns that we're trying to get a particular need met. I've asked all 9 types. I've done this so many times at this point where I've said, the thing is that you're trying to achieve a particular result by your type. How effective is it by your pattern? Like, think about like what you're trying to achieve. And so we've actually started doing this. We did this through the Driven to Drawn series. It's like, so if you're a type 1 and you're trying to achieve being good, getting to that place of having peace and serenity, how are you going about getting to that place of having mental peace? What are you doing to get there? Right? And it's like, at the end of the day, it's not quite getting there. It's kind of just like taking the edge off of not having what it is that you're seeking, but not really giving you what it is you want. And I think that that's the problem and the foolishness of our patterns, is that they work to a certain degree and then they stop working, but we keep repeating them and doubling down on them in hopes that they will get us what we need. That is, I think, the foolishness of all 9 types, what we do. So that's why I'm saying I'm going with wisdom is light. It's the insight into seeing something you didn't see before. And then it's not just the seeing, it's then how do you move from that to a new way, I think requires much more. That we've had these, everything is coming together in this wisdom. I think it's like information, head center, inspiration, heart center, right? But we've talked about, but ultimately, to change and transformation really takes place through the body center, the action, the movement that changes everything for us. And so I think that's why it does require you see the insight. Yeah, I see. That's different. That's what wisdom does. But then wisdom is also embodied. How do you now move forward in a new way? And what are you learning from that embodied practice that then gives you new wisdom And that's what we're talking about when we say an ecology of practices. Now you're getting a kind of a picture of how that works. And that can work through the three centers as well as through the external, which we can explore in a minute.
Yeah, so let's talk about the internal wisdom of these three centers. And we're calling these three truth, beauty, and goodness. As the three centers that align with the three centers of intelligence. So I love wisdom as light. I think it's almost a good starting point. I have a song that the first line is, "May you always spot your lighthouse when the fog rolls in," as this metaphor for that very kind of thing, right? So there's a fog that rolls into our lives sometimes, and it's like the wisdom is the lighthouse that appears, and it's like, this is so you don't run ashore and sink. There is a something to be seen. But let's talk about truth as a head center. And I think I want to talk about it because it's a word that gets really twisted these days. Truth often means now what I believe or what my opinion is or my truth, which might be different than your truth. But we're talking about truth that is ultimate reality. That is not a theoretical, that is not an opinion. We're talking about something that is deeper than that, that is beyond that. So you want to talk a little bit about truth. How do you see that, what that means?
Yeah. And I think there's so much to this, but kind of springboard off of what we were just talking about with wisdom being that ability to see the way you're currently trying to get your needs met and then to see differently. I think that's true. You have to confront that ugly reality of what it is that you're trying to do, what the need your type is trying to meet, the vulnerability, the fear, all the stuff that we don't really get, we don't expose, we don't want others seeing because it feels shameful to us to admit that there's this sense of inadequacy, this sense of
maybe what I've always depended in isn't enough.
Yeah. Like I'm not enough. Maybe this is how I feel anyways internally. I don't feel like I'm enough. I don't feel like, or I feel like I'm too much. I have fears of being taken advantage of, fears of being abandoned, rejected. These are primary drivers. And I think that that's something that if we don't see what our primary drivers are doing, we can lie to ourselves. We can get very much into that self-deception that, the problems are external to us, and what I think a lot of the bypassing that's happening today, where people are wrapped up into ideologies, politics, even religion, or the latest movement, who's this new, guy that's claiming to be the true pope, apparently has made a bit of a splash on
I don't know anything about this or what.
Yeah, I just literally heard this from one of my clients yesterday who's like, you haven't heard of this? And I'm like, no. So it's it's just, and how people are falling down the rabbit hole of not necessarily following and believing them. I mean, there's plenty of them that are doing that.
There's people who are actually believing this person?
Yeah, he's got a following. Oh yeah.
And he's some kind of a Catholic.
No, he's not. He's actually, raised speaking Arabic. He's, half Egyptian and I think half something else. A blend of East and West or something. I forget what he said. He's a blend of both the Christian Jewish upbringing and the Muslim upbringing. So, anyways, so it's just, I find it remarkable, as an experiment of thought, like who would believe this stuff and why? Because it's not remotely convincing, not at least to many of us. But then again, I've been fooled into believing things and into following things for other reasons that other people wouldn't be convinced by. And then, so there's wisdom there to be pursued. Like, why is it that I'm drawn to this thing? This is what we said in the previous podcast is, it's not that the clock is broken and now you have to hire somebody to constantly be adjusting the clock. It's like, you got to hire somebody to you got to fix the clock. That's the fundamental problem, is the very process, the very nature by which you're going about trying to meet your needs. The very thing that, why did you fall prey to a cult or to a cult leader or to some new conspiracy? Why did you fall prey to it? Not, oh, I found out that it was wrong and now I've moved on. That's not sufficient. That's not wisdom. Wisdom is not just about believing something. It's about, how do you believe? Why do you believe something? What led you to that? And so why are people falling down, even pursuing those who are so like, oh, this is another juicy nugget to kind of just, dive into and make fun of and, prove how dumb this is, how wrong this is, all the way to people who are completely into it and have, are the believers. There's so much of the bypassing that's going on. Like, why are you pursuing this? What is of interest to you in this? I just had a conversation with a family member about why there was an interest in a particular thing that this individual couldn't let go of. Like, year after year talking about something that still annoys them and still troubles them. And it was like, well, so why is that still hanging on to you? And why is that still of interest to you? Like, let's get underneath that and do it with grace and with humility. Like, let's explore that and see what's underneath that, because it leads to new insight. And it did for this individual. Like, there was this like, oh, right. Oh, yeah, I can see. And yes, I could do something different about that. That's kind of hope giving. So, yeah, so I'm suggesting that I think that the truth has to do with confronting the ugly things that we don't want to confront about ourselves sometimes, the courage to go there, and confront the ways that we might self-deceive and keep running off to something new. Like, it's easy to be angry at the current administration and focus all your vitriol there. It's much easier to do that than it is to do what? Take care of the things at the home front. Take care of the fact that don't like where you ended up in life. That's hard.
Yeah. It's easier to be right than responsible.
Man, that's the way to put it. I certainly resonate with that, Jim. I far prefer being right than responsible.
Well, it is. It's a proxy fulfillment, right? So it's one of those things that it can make you feel good without actually having to be a part of something good. Because it doesn't challenge the self.
Yeah.
Because the first step of wisdom is to know that you're a fool.
Yeah.
So this just happened at jiu-jitsu the other day, and it's funny because a lot of people they go through this process when they come into this, and anything like jiu-jitsu or anything that is a skill-based situation where you don't even know what you don't know. And so you actually the first thing you have to learn is that you don't know, which is one of the hardest things to learn. One of the hardest things for anyone to learn is that they don't know.
Yeah.
And so, but in this situation, what happened the other day is this person and I were talking, and they come from a particular faith tradition, and they were talking about this historical religious artifact that they feel helps confirm their faith. And someone else who comes from a similar but slightly different tradition came in and said, "What are you guys talking about?" And we mentioned it, and he's like, "Oh, it's such a bunch of crap, isn't it?"
Yeah.
And then so they started dialoguing back and forth, and I was just watching the two of them for a second, and so like, well, don't you think it's like this, or don't you think it's like this? And I said, I feel like if anything, it's proving that you find what you're looking for. That's a great Henry David Thoreau quote that we've been talking to my daughter about lately, which is it's not what you look at, it's what you see.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so much of the thing. And when you see the same thing all the time, the first thing you have to admit is that you're blind. That's the step of responsibility. I don't see.
Yeah.
This is how and practically speaking, this is when we actually start trusting people. It's very hard to trust people who really think they get it, that they know. You either have to trust them completely, and that's the whole guruism cultish thing that we mentioned, or you go, they have credibility because they can say, I don't know.
Right.
And so that is like the start of wisdom, because the truth, if we're talking about headspace and we're talking about a foundational pillar of wisdom, the truth is, I don't know.
Well, and I think that's a difference between the pursuer and the purveyor. Like, you are either a pursuer of wisdom, and then you can be a purveyor of wisdom, or you choose the path of being, I'm going to be a purveyor of wisdom, but not a pursuer. That's guruism.
What's interesting, because we've said on this podcast several times that we are not the ones who are here to disperse wisdom, but we're collectors of it. And so we've talked about in the community so much of the work we've done on the Enneagram, the way we've written about the types. We've collected quotes and stories and experiences with so many people that type that we have collected it. We are not the ones dispensing it. We're not the ones coming up and saying, "Here, this is truth. This is right. This is right."
Yeah.
Even when we talk to people about their type, we're always asking, well, does this resonate with you? Like, we've heard this from other people. How would you say it for yourself? How would you say it differently? Like, where are you coming from on it? Because we're staying in the receptive, humble position. Because to me, truth and humility are inseparable.
Well, they have to be. I mean, there's no way you can be a person who pursues truth and not have confronted the fact that you didn't know something, and be regularly confronted with the fact that you don't know something. And that is humbling, very, very humbling. I mean, to the point of I know humiliation is a bad word, but it's tough to name the thing, but there's a sense of which you feel like that feeling of I've just been dropped down a few pegs, and it doesn't feel great, but at the same time, there's this sort of mixture of like, boy, I feel stupid, or I feel, but like, wow, I'm also like wowed by what I just heard, and that is beyond me. Or let's take, for example, jujitsu, somebody who's a black belt in jujitsu versus somebody who's just starting out, who's got a whole lot of bravado because they
Mhm.
they did some, they were like did some street fighting growing up and kind of knew how to,
Or
you
they're
know,
tough, they're really
handle
strong,
themselves. Are
you
they
know.
strong? Yeah. I can bench 315 10 times. It's like, great. Let's see how much that helps you on the mat here. But what they find is very quickly like there's a humbling experience, but then there's also that respect. And I think that is, by the way, this is my take on, and for those of you who are not from this tradition, you can find, I'm sure it shows up in all sorts of wisdom tradition or faith traditions, but there's a sort of like fear of the Lord kind of concept. That's a fear is in Proverbs has this thing, fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It used to bother me so much. I hated that verse. I wanted, as I completely, all I did was just say it didn't mean that. It meant something else, and I would do that regularly with that verse. And like, well, it just means like, respect or something, that's just, now I look at it and I'm like, oh no, I get that. Like, it was remarkably difficult when I went to seminary and realized that I was among a lot of brilliant people, many of whom were so much smarter than I was, students. And then the professors themselves were freaking brilliant. And this particular seminary happened to be, fairly, well respected, well known, top notch professors, brilliant minds. Here I'm with these people, and I'm like, I know nothing. And it was a fear of the Lord kind of experience. Like, I'm intimidated by this. I've said before, I said in the previous podcast, you can either try to make the world be smaller than you, so you're the big fish in a small bowl kind of feeling, which then you just simply believe that there's nothing, you knock the intelligences of those above you down. I literally had this happen to me. It was really kind of bothered me a lot. But a guy that I respected, he was a well-known leader in the denomination that I was a part of. I was listening to this keynote speaker who was keynote speaker for that particular session, and I admired this individual. I thought he was so brilliant. The things he was saying was so insightful. And literally this mentor of mine walks by and goes, "Don't be impressed. There's nothing new. He's not communicating anything new or different than everything that we already all know." And I remember thinking, wow, that came out of left field and it felt so weird.
Mm.
And it struck me as that caused me to shift a little bit from that. Like, no, I'm drawn to people that are ever pursuing more wisdom, who recognize their own limitations, who have a sort of fear of that there's something greater than me. There's something that knows, there's still more that I don't know or understand. And versus someone who just said to me, it's, and tries to make it smaller than himself. And I thought, well, that's the choice I have. Either I'm going to be a big fish in a small bowl world, and that feels good, try to make myself, at least equal to the other fishes in the bowl. Or I'm going to say, dang it, I hate it. But in fact, there's some people who are far more moral than I am. There are people that are far more advanced in their understanding and their wisdom and their knowledge than I am. There are people who are more skilled at certain things. There are people who are better husbands than I am a husband, better fathers than I am a father, and all of those things, and accept that. And that's a very humbling thing. But I do think it's the beginning of wisdom to have that ability to look at that. And I think that's truth. Yeah, that's truth, because it confronts us and it exposes where we actually are and who we actually are rather than who we think we would like to believe we are.
Truth is an aspect of wisdom, but it's also a revealer of the wise, where when someone is humbled, someone is so much further along than them in something. And I couldn't help but think of the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is the study that shows that it takes the same amount of intelligence to know you don't understand something as it does to actually learn about it. people who don't know, don't have the capacity to know that they don't know. That's the whole Dunning-Kruger effect. And why I say that truth is both a aspect of wisdom, but also a revealer of it, is when I went into jujitsu, or when I've gone into some of these places with super smart people, and I know that they are so far beyond me, and intellectually or physically or whatever the case is, they're so far beyond. There's two reactions. One is to withdraw, to defend, to get defensive, to b- hold the ego. And the other, which is the response of wisdom, and why I say it's a revealer of wisdom, is to go, wow, I don't know, teach me.
Yeah.
It's like the most wise thing you can say is like, show me. How did you do that? Help me understand this. Help me do this. And the being in a place of humility then demonstrates this is someone who is on the journey to wisdom, and they're going to be able to do that. So yeah, let's talk about the next aspect.
Yeah.
The heart center, which is, I love it. It has such a different feel than what we were just talking about it. But a heart center, a pillar of wisdom's beauty.
Yeah.
Beauty.
Yeah, because beauty is not always seen as essential. It's seen as, it's a garnish. It's like, well, yeah, that's nice. If we have enough time, we might do a little bit of art, music. We might do a little bit of getting out into nature and seeing the beauty of nature. We might do that if we have time. And, functionality, yeah, that's more important, than beauty. And I think that the funny thing about how important beauty is now both you and I are looking at it as that's like an essential. It's so essential to wisdom. And so that's becoming a big question for me, is how does beauty help in the wisdom endeavor? How does it move us towards that? Well, one of the things that I have found, at least from the heart center, so now we're talking about centers of intelligence, is like the heart center for me is the place where I'm in touch with my own sense of compassion, tenderness, the ways that I have been wounded, the ways that I have failed others, the ways that I feel sometimes shame around certain things I've done, and I can really empathize and be with other people in their own shame and their own pain and their own suffering, and that becomes really beautiful to me when there's these moments of empathy, tenderness with other people. And one of the things that I'm not finding today very much of is any of that in the public discourse. Rarely I find that. And when I find it, it becomes, you subscribe, I click on it. I want to see more of that. It has an effect on us. In fact, I was just having this conversation with a client where I said, how does that make you feel at the sensory, emotional level? Like, it was like, well, I feel validated. So yeah, how does that feels good, doesn't it? Yeah. Well, what is that? What category do we put that? I think I put that in beauty. Isn't that beautiful? Feel validated. That's a beautiful thing. You see the smile, right? You see the beauty emanate from them. And it's not just like, it's a light. There's a light that comes through, and that there's a new look in their eyes. There's a new look on their face. That's beauty. And so to me, that's so much, like, I'm drawn so much to that. And in a world where it seems like it's just so much ugliness around us, that purports, by the way, to be smart, and the rest of you don't know what you're talking about. The rest of you are wrong. You're all fooled and deceived. Here, I know the truth. Well, your truth is ugly. Like, I mean, you might say it's truth, and that's the reason why we're saying, right, truth, beauty, and we're going to look at goodness in a minute. That's why these are an ecology. They're an environment. They depend on that. There's an interdependency that's happening there. And so you can claim truth all day long, but if your truth is ugly and it's producing ugliness, man, I want nothing to do with it, because I'm starting to believe now that truth, which cannot, by the way, survive alone. Truth cannot survive as its own thing. It is necessary to have beauty alongside, to check it, to test it, to say, hey, this is not beautiful. And so it's not the purest form of truth. And I'm convinced that the more beauty is inside truth, the more truthful it is. The more the truth is inside beauty, the more beautiful it becomes. By the way, I believe that with goodness as well. And so I don't think it's the same thing with our centers of intelligence, Jim, right? It's like you are never more a healthy head center type than when you have your heart online and it's serving your head center. Then your head becomes clear, right? That's your strength, your gift. Heart center, same thing. When your heart is pulling in the data from the body and the head center. Yeah, now it's like, oh, okay. I'm seeing the difference between my feelings, that person, and I'm starting to get a better sense of things. So, anyways, yeah, that's got a little excited about this, but
Yeah, I
that's what's
like
coming
it.
up for me.
I like it. The reason I know that beauty is essential is because no one makes a pilgrimage to see the functional. They make a pilgrimage to see the beautiful. It's going to pull you in. And I'm using beauty, and I love, my favorite definition comes from John O'Donohue, where he talks about beauty is that in the presence of which we feel more alive. That is where you get this internal yes. And so when you see someone caring for someone else, what do you say? Oh, it's beautiful. That's amazing.
Yeah, right.
And it's
Yeah.
different than like a beautiful face. I like how he makes the distinction between that's glamour, distinguish between glamour and beauty. Beauty is when you see service done, but it's also an experience that you have. I remember this one day that's like frozen in my mind because it was so beautiful. It was June and I had just learned to surf and I was coming down a wave. And as I started coming down this wave, I saw this giant silver fish, like probably longer than my shin, shoot under me as I went over him. Just this
Wow.
boom. And I'm looking down and I literally just yelled out in joy of how amazing like this moment
Yeah.
was. And it was,
Incredible.
what does a moment like that force you to say? It forces you to say,
Wow.
thank you.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wow and thank you.
Yeah.
And so when wow and thank you is combined with humility and truth, now we're starting to talk. Now we can get on the path toward the embodiment that we're headed towards. But to me, it is indistinguishable to have something that is wise without it also just having that wow, thank you element to it, to where you say, I feel more alive because I am experiencing this. When you do something beautiful for another person, and I've had people do beautiful things for me, it changed me and it made me want to do more beautiful things and be a part of people's story in that way. And that is when you go, yes, now I'm seeing the way these are linked and the necessity of that and the essentialism of beauty.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the wisdom in it is in part that, first of all, we're made for it. You can't deny that we're made for beauty. I mean, no matter why is it that I think one of the first things the Nazi Germans removed was music from those they conquered. It's like there's something about beauty, about music that makes, like you said, John O'Donohue's thing about how it makes you feel alive, right? It does. It makes you feel alive. It makes you engage in a new way. It helps you to even perceive things more differently. I think that's one of the things artists are so good at doing is you may have seen this before, but I'm going to create this in a way that you haven't seen this before, right? The point of creating art is not to go, this is an exact replication of the previous. Nobody wants that. Patty and I are, addicted to the voice. We just love watching that. We both, almost every time we watch it, we cry. There are moments of just tears.
Yeah, I get it.
And it's because of the beauty, and it's beauty in all of it, the way that they speak to each other, the way they encourage, they see the love, the light in each other. And so, but what I love about it is even some of the challenges sometimes the coaches will give is like, hey, I know you don't want to be a karaoke version. I know you're not trying to mimic. I want to see more of you come through this. So I want to see something more in you. Right? That's not just straight up like, this is the truth about you. It includes that. But it's like I'm pulling at your beauty, your own essential beauty. And I want to see that come through because that is what somehow speaks to the rest of us. There's an aspect of your experience that none of us have tasted yet. Isn't that wild? That no matter how many similar experiences we might have, the way you're going to voice your experience, the way you're going to communicate it through your body, through your voice, through your words, through the emotions, it's going to come through differently. And it's your unique beauty. And it has to come through for us because we're bettered for having it. It's like something changes in me from having experienced your beauty. So I think beauty perpetuates beauty, and it perpetuates a world where there is this gentle honoring of each other's uniqueness. And beauty, I think, is it's a combination of a number of things, but I think in one, it's like the pain and then the hope. It's like the loss and the hope. It's like bringing those together and being fully present to that and creating something from that. And
Hmm.
then it's like, people are touched by that. It's like, wow, what an incredible expression of beauty that came through that pain, and still with hope mixed in there, right? Because some people, it's just like all pain and all darkness, right? I've been there, and it's like that's all that's coming through, and that's not necessarily beautiful. And then there's the sort of like bypassing and avoiding that entire thing and being like, everything's wonderful, everything is, and that's not beautiful, right? We have the caricatures of that, everything is wonderful. What is that? Everything
Everything is
is
awesome.
awesome, yeah. I mean, I laughed when I watched that animation with AJ. It was hilarious because I'm like, oh yeah, it's definitely a Type 7 singing that. Like
Well,
everything
in
is
the
awesome.
context of
Yeah.
the movie, it was something they would sing, but it was like about how they were all controlled. It's so awesome that we're all controlled and doing this job.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So
Oh,
it
interesting.
was like the opposite of, yeah.
Yeah, which is very much of sort of like we're trying to control you into that sort of happy, avoid the fact that you're being controlled, which is which again, anything that bypasses the reality of life, which is there's pain. Can you engage that pain? But can you engage the hope that's in there too? The losses, the hope, the pain, the joys, all of that coming together in us. And that to me, the beautiful mixture of that can turn into something, yeah, that's much more, overusing the word, but much more beautiful.
Yeah. Beauty is the ground of healing.
Mm.
So to experience healing, one of the places that is most essential to that is beauty. There's a few years ago, I wanted to train for a triathlon. I started taking those long bike rides, and outside I'm in nature. And I remember I was on this path one day and I started thinking about something that had gone wrong in my life, something that someone had done that had wronged me, and it had all these repercussions. And I was thinking about it, but I'm in this beautiful place. The sun is like coming through the trees along the dirt path, and I'm just breathing, and I'm just in awe of what's around me, but internally I'm processing all of this ugliness of this experience.
Mm.
And I remember in that moment saying, I don't want to hold this anymore. I don't want to
Mm.
hold on to this anymore. I want to let go. I want to release this person and this situation and this experience. And I want good things for them, because I want them to have a beautiful transformational experience. And it shifted internally, because I was experiencing beauty in a way that freed me and made me want to walk into forgiveness. And
Mm.
so they
That's good.
say that in EMDR, they have this eye movement that is supposed to be this healing experience, and a lot of people have had really wonderful experiences with that. They said one of the reasons it works is it mimics what we do in nature. When we are walking
Interesting.
in
Yeah.
nature, we are shifting our eyes from left to right, and we are taking in our surroundings. So we don't do this when we're like driving on a narrow road, but when we are in nature and walking in the woods or whatever, we are shifting our eyes around. And they say that a lot of the man-made world is in, very much right angles and corners, and it's very structured, whereas nature is composed of fractals. So our visual cortex takes it in differently. And when we're shifting around, and it feels beautiful to us, which is why they actually did brain scans on people that they had walking in the woods for 20 minutes a day, 3 times a week, and then one that was doing it an hour every day, up to people who were staying in the woods for, I think it was a month straight. And they found that at the end of the month, those people's brain waves were basically at alpha state. It was just like completely
Mm.
calm. That's not the right state, but they were in the state of completely like, I'm calm, I'm good, I don't feel disrupted, because they're in an environment that is conducive. So when we put ourselves in beautiful environments, we're putting ourselves in environments that are conducive to healing. And if we
Mm.
are not surrounded by beauty, the beautiful actions of others, beauty in nature, beauty in experiences, if we are not surrounded by beauty, it is very difficult to experience actual healing. All we're going to do is we're going to have our needs for blame, for shame, for proxy fulfillment, and for avoidance, because that's really the only thing we can do absent of beauty. And so if we
Yeah.
want wisdom, then we want healing. And if we want healing, we need beauty.
Yeah. Yeah. That's perfect. So the third pillar is goodness, or the good. And if we think about truth, beauty, and goodness as this sort of ecology as we're describing it, goodness orients us more towards something akin to values, something akin to morality, but not a strict, like, black and white, sort of this is right, this is wrong version of morality, but more so as we aspire to these values because they aim us upward. And they aim us towards something. And that's what we've been calling the transcendent, is that, some have even called it the ultimate good. And I like that. It's like the ultimate version of what is good. And it's something that we don't always grasp fully. I think I can say that we never grasp it fully and be very safe in saying that. But it's still an aim. And I think it's a worthwhile aim for all of us to do that, to aim to have a set of values that we attempt to live by. And it's not something that is meant to be a kind of a tyranny in our lives, but something that orients us towards a practice that I think should be done as a collective, as opposed to, well, it's my own individual values that I live by, regardless of what anybody else thinks. I've defined what is good. I think we've said that about beauty, and we said that about truth. So it should be consistent with goodness as well, that is something we discover in practice with other people. And I have a whole lot more thoughts on that, but what comes up for you as I'm saying that?
Yeah, if something is good, it is not theoretically good as an idea, or just, it's not removed from experienced reality. It's embodied. So where it's something you see an action take place, and you go, that's good. You see something happen and you go, that is good, because there's a practicality to it. This is not the goodness of an idea. This is an embodied practical action. It's the present ultimate reality in the now. It's manifested in the now. And I think when we say that something is good, we see something, and we talked a little bit of this under the beautiful part. That's just beautiful. There's also something, it was good because it is creating the right kind of future because of the present action. Eventually, we'll have to be evaluated in the fruitfulness of it. And I like how you talk about fruitfulness as a way to evaluate. And I think that's what we're talking about when we say something's good.
Yeah, because it's going to be both a definition, but then there's a scoreboard. So let me play with this analogy. So you have the definition. We love definitions. So it's sort of like, okay, the definition of a win. So let's do this with jiu-jitsu. What's the definition of a win, Jim?
You tap out your opponent.
Yeah, it's really simple, right? So conceptually, you can say, here's the sort of way that what a win is in jiu-jitsu, is your opponent has tapped out, okay? That's the definition. But then you have the scoreboard. And the scoreboard is, did your opponent actually tap out? I think that is much more of what we're talking about. That's the movement in the embodied movement of, are we aiming our lives and orientation towards this ultimate goodness, however we've defined that. And it should demonstrate through a scoreboard that actually produced something akin to fruitfulness. And that's what we're saying. I think it's, people can say, well, I did a great job of planting these seeds in the ground. Did a fantastic job of planting the seeds, but there's no fruit. So what you have to do is evaluate, like, the seed itself, the work that was done, the soil, the environment. You have to kind of think through those things. But to me, the fruitfulness piece has been massively important, because I've thought about how there's right now in politics, if we look at politics and religion, there are things people believe in that are sort of their ideologies, that are their theologies, and they claim them to be right and morally superior.
And true.
It's true, and yeah, it's true as well. So it's like both the head center, the sort of body center, morally better, right? Right actions, usually ugly though, not really heart-centric. But there's no fruitfulness that is being examined. It's like, well, okay, but what's the fruit of that belief? You can't do it immediately, just like you can't do it with, gardening or, farming. You do, after a few seasons, you would start to go, maybe this isn't working. Maybe there's something wrong here. And that's, to me, where it's important to have a definition of goodness, a sort of aspiration. These are our values. And then how do we put those into sort of actions, and then, okay, these are a kind of a set of actions that can get us towards those values. But what if those actions aren't producing anything good? I've asked people like, does that make you feel more loving and more peaceful and more joyful and more no? Well, then, consider that maybe that might not be all that true or all that helpful, and certainly not beautiful. Because if it's producing those fruit, we'd all say that's not only true, it's good, but it's also beautiful.
You have this thing about when we say that we're being loving, and you said that's defined by the other person, the person on the receiving end
Hmm.
of the love. And I think maybe this is the similar way. Like the
Yeah, I was thinking
goodness
about the
is,
same
it
thing.
has to be defined by those experiencing the thing that you are calling good, that they are actually the ones who say whether or not.
I was literally thinking about that a half hour ago. Like those two are parallel.
Sweet.
They have to be. Yeah. Yeah, it's a great parallel. I think it really is kind of, it challenges me. Like that's interesting. If I think that something is true, right, or good or beautiful, but I'm doing it sort of in the silo, then how do you know? Right? And is that really rewarding and is that really fulfilling? I think we are designed to have shared experiences of grief and shared experiences of joy. And that is the best kind of experiencing of those things. Well, so it is with goodness. And so it is with love. If I'm saying I'm loving you, remember the fantastic saying, Jim, in church, love the sinner but hate the sin. Like the sinner might be like, well, I don't really feel loved, and the answer was, well, love sometimes hurts, and love sometimes, you know, and it's like, okay, fair enough, but how long are you going to go with that and not get the sort of feedback from the recipient that felt and that their experience of it was that it was loving, or it's true, it's true, it's true, and yet the individual hearing the truth is not having that insight, that wisdom aha moment of like, that's landing or I'm getting it. And I'm not saying that that has to universally happen, but you have to have some of that happening for it to,
It should be the majority.
yeah,
That should
yeah.
be our defining of how that all works together. So I like how we're talking about these being the three pillars, because we've talked about this in the Enneagram world. For something to be completed, it needs to have all three centers, the head, heart, and body. And for something to be truly wise, it should be good, beautiful, and true. That these three pillars are a way to look at something and say, is anything missing? Then it might be short of wisdom.
Hmm.
And I like that we're trying to put a name on something from a lot of different angles. And I would love to hear other people's thoughts on this. Maybe they have three different words that matter to them, but the three centers we know is going to show up in anything we do. And often when something falls short, it's missing one of the elements. Like musicians always used to joke that, or any kind of work where they're like, we want it fast, cheap, and good. It's like, well, you can pick two.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the opposite of what we're going for in this world. It's like everything that is going to be wise, that's going to be holistic, it's going to need to include all three. And if something's missing, we're not going to call it wisdom.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think you can run probably almost anything. Even the enactment of some of the policies of the current administration. We could look at that and go, okay, it's not whether you agree with a certain policy or not. It's what is the run it through that filter. Run it through. Is it true? Is it beautiful? And is it good? And you might say, well, yeah, for the case of we sometimes have to be messy and solve things. And okay, fair enough. But I'm just saying, have you included that at least in your evaluation of things? And to me, I think that that's something we have to do for ourselves, but also as we look out in the world. Are we seeing that as as the higher value of like, can we aim towards that? Can we deliberately aim towards that? And I'm not honestly seeing much of that happening these days, which explains why there's so much of a sense
In a
of
while.
confusion. And what's that?
In a while.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But I think that's what we're trying to create. I heard a comedian who I think has a lot of wisdom I saw a comedian I think has a lot of wisdom. He was speaking from stage and people were throwing out questions. And somebody asked, what's a life advice you would give? He said, it's really simple. It's two words: prioritize later. As in, you're prioritizing what the future you is going to be proud of. And I think when you're making decisions, the way you know that future you will be proud of it is if it's true, good, and beautiful. That if it has these three things, you will probably later be able to stand by that decision and go, I think I made the best one I could make at that time.
Mm.
You're talking about policies and all this stuff. I don't think so often in our decision making, often we think, am I right? Can I hold up the banner of righteousness? Am
Mm-hmm.
I like speaking my truth, right? Which is another way of sometimes saying my opinion. But if
Right.
it's good,
Yeah.
true, and beautiful, is it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, boy, I'd love to say a few more things about true as well, but just because I'm thinking, like, yeah, you just made a great point. It's not just, your opinion, which is oftentimes what we mean by truth,
My truth, right?
my truth. Yeah. Yeah, because there's a level of depth to truth, I think, that exposes everything. It's like I've said before, it's like light. So wisdom is like light, but truth is like light as well. It's like you can't hold the light and aim it at somebody else. As convenient and as comfortable that would be, as empowering to the self as that would be, to aim the light of truth on other people, the light is something we have to walk into ourselves and be exposed by it. So I think that you can always tell if someone seems to be in control of the truth and they're shining the light on everybody else around them, it's likely devoid, significantly devoid of real truth there, because you have to be exposed by it too. It's like, so to what degree are you aware of how you have gotten it wrong, and how you have not just been wrong, but how you've gotten it wrong? The entire process was wrong, and you've come to awareness of that. But I think that the good can work against, in a helpful way, against a meaninglessness that has overtaken so many people in the modern world. There's this sort of throwing up your hands, like, why bother? Why bother? Why bother doing good? Why bother working for the good? And then what happens is you go back to a more survivalistic morality, which is like, it's just, I got to fend for myself. I got to do what I got to do to survive. And there's less of I think when we're drawn properly by love, by an orientation towards love and towards hope, towards a better world, we become a little bit more collective in our mindset. Like, I'm doing this for the greater good of the whole. I mean, I'm making sacrifices even now in my life for that purpose. But it's hard, man. I can feel that sort of, why bother? Things are just a disaster. Things are a mess. And, other people aren't feeling that. Other people are really like, woohoo, things are great right now. Or, there's all sorts of experiences, but we can relate to that feeling of having been in a situation where it doesn't feel like being good matters. And I think in part it's because sometimes the immediate results seem devastating, or just surprises that we didn't expect along the way of life, where we've been knocked down by difficulties. And we're like, well, geez, I've been good. I would have thought that karma, or I would have thought that God would have blessed me, or, it's like, doesn't seem like that happens sometimes. It seems like, and that's part of the wisdom tradition, is there are those very questions being posed in religious wisdom tradition, which is, why bother when you see good people dying early, being mistreated unjustly, and other people who are evil getting away with it? So why bother? Why bother doing good?
The reason the wise people are few is because most want to complain about the way the world should be, instead of doing what Gandhi says, which is to be the change you want to see in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us want to complain, get cynical, say that I'm powerless, I can't do anything about this. Most are going to hold up their banner and say, if everyone was more like me, the world would be a better place. If people would agree with me, if I can get rid of enough of the wrong people, then the world would be
Yeah.
a better place.
Yeah.
This is why the wise are few, because the wise say, be the change you want to see in the world. Be these things, and you
Yeah.
will see change.
That's really good, Jim. Really good. That's powerful, because if we can get to the place, I like this particular wisdom teacher in the Hebrew, it's Koheleth, but it's translated as, or the name of the book is Ecclesiastes in the Jewish tradition. The reason for why doing good is important, according to Koheleth, is because if you can actually enjoy your bread, enjoy right now in this moment, be grateful, be thankful in this moment, that itself is what makes for a meaningful life. I'm adding to what he's saying there. But that is, I think that if your meaning is pushed off into the future as something that, if I do good, then that is going to be, yes, there is a hope for the future that we're planting seed. True. But it has to be that you eat the fruit of your own tree in the present moments, that you are proud of your own fruitfulness. You're proud of that. I like the good that I'm putting out into the world. I get to eat of it, right? Remember that saying of, what is it? Hating somebody else is like
Oh, when we're talking
drinking
about
poison.
forgiveness. Yeah.
Forgiveness, hoping that somebody else is going to die. You drink
Yeah.
you drink poison, hoping someone else dies, and that I think is very much um, the reverse of that. In sometimes the way we live and trying to do good in the world is like, I'm trying to do good, or I'm suffering now by sacrificing for the good in order for something better to emerge in the future world. But if all you're doing is sacrificing and you're being miserable in doing the good, well, then you're not really tasting of that goodness in this present moment. And I think that that's also why that's unsustainable. And I do think that what you just read, that quote is so good, because it's like, yeah, be the good. Why? Well, because you will like yourself and you will be proud of yourself. You will be able to sleep better at night. I think that is the reason. That is more of a sustainable reason for me than always pushing things off into the future.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I said we would end these podcasts with a practical practice, a wisdom practice. And one of the ones that I recommend is collecting stories, phrases that feel like sacred to you. They feel like sacred text. They almost feel like scripture to you, but they feel so important that you want to keep them close to you, and then start to collect those and put those together. Like Be the Change You Want to See in the World. There's a whole bunch of them. We'll be talking about some of the different stories and some of the, like, we've already used certain quotes, but start to compile a list of things that are reflective of your value system. Quotes and stories that reflect how you see living well into the world in a way that is good, that is true, and that is beautiful. And that is a practice that is revealing, but it's also something that sticks with us, that reminds us of who we are wanting to be and become. Till next time, my friends, we'll see you soon.